Here's the deal. As we get started today, it's nearly impossible to figure out the exact way something is supposed to go together without instructions or guidance. If they didn't have that giant booklet, there's no way they would have gotten that project done. If they didn't have help from friends or from the middle schoolers, it would not have been possible to get that Millennium Falcon built correctly, much less than 15 hours, but they did it. Some of you earlier said you go to YouTube and look for instructions. Over the last couple of years, I've had to do some repairs on our washer and dryer, and believe it or not, those are not skills that most youth pastors have. So I've watched hours of YouTube videos to figure out how to do things that I wouldn't be able to do on my own because I needed instructions and I needed guidance. I know that also sometimes we think that that's what it's like when it comes to our relationship with God. We see people that are like, they just seem to know God and they get Him and they're following Him and they're close to Him, and we're trying to figure out, like, did we miss some instructions? Is there a manual we missed? So this month, we're doing this series, The Beginner's Guide to Connecting with God, to give you some tips and some tools, some guidance and some resources to help you grow closer to God here in the first month of 2020. Because sometimes it's not real complicated. Sometimes we just have to get back to the beginning and remember the basics. Because let's be honest, when it comes to our faith, sometimes it just simply feels like we're not feeling it. We're not getting it. I mean, think about it. You're in here, you're singing worship songs. Everybody else seems to know the words. They're raising hands. They're into it. They're celebrating God. And you're just like, I'm just kind of here. Or maybe you're reading the Bible and you know these words come from God and they're supposed to be life-changing, but for you, they just seem like words today. Or maybe you decide to get baptized and follow Jesus, and people tell you it's the biggest decision you'll ever make in your life. It will change your life, and you really don't feel that closer to God today than you did before you got baptized. Or maybe you're here today and you're new. You're here because your friend invited you, your parents dropped you off. Maybe somebody made you come, and you're not even sure if you believe that God even exists or real, but you have no idea where to start to even research that and find out if it's true. And then maybe a lot of you sitting here who are like, yeah, when it comes to all this stuff, I feel like I've been around church long enough, I should know how to be close to God, but I don't. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with God? But I'm here to tell you this morning the truth, that there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with God. Sometimes we just make it too complicated, or things get in the way of us getting closer to God. And so we're going to give you some ways to connect. If you look around the room this morning, there's a lot of different people in this room who have different interests and hobbies and families and schools we go to and things we're good at. And so it would make sense that there's a lot of different people in here. There's a lot of different ways to connect with God. There's so many different ways that God uses us. There are things that I do that might be really awesome for me to connect with God that may not necessarily work for you. Or the way I do my Bible reading or my study or my prayer doesn't work the same way for me as it does for you or for your small group leader. There are so many ways to connect with God. Part of it is, think about this. Nobody who competes at the Olympics this year, nobody who's a professional in the playoffs for the NFL, nobody who was great at their job is great because they showed up the first day and they were just awesome. You had those rookies, you had those new people at school who are really good on the first day, but if they don't keep showing up and keep trying, they're not going to get better and not going to improve. It's the same way with God. If you think you just show up at church and God's going to magically be there for you, that's not quite how it works. I mean, you just don't show up in your family one day and all of a sudden everything is awesome. It takes work in those relationships. Think about the friends that you have. You're probably friends because you spent some time together. You've done some things that were fun and maybe some things that got you in trouble, but you've spent some time together as friends. It's the same way with God. We have to keep trying and keep showing up. One of Jesus' followers was named John Mark. We know him by Mark, and he wrote a whole biography about Jesus. In that biography, he records conversations Jesus had. And there are some people who genuinely wanted to know, how do I get closer to God? And there were some people who only asked Jesus questions because they wanted to trap him. They wanted him to say something that would get him in trouble so they could arrest him and get rid of this nuisance. But sometimes their questions backfired. Like this expert came up to Jesus and he asked them, what's the most important commandment? Because we know there's the 10 commandments, but they had hundreds of rules, some that were from God and some that were just traditions that they held up as important. And he was like, there's no way Jesus will get this question right. Here's how Jesus answered. In Mark 12:30, it records him saying, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. He goes on to say a second one is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So love God and love your neighbor, that's everything. That's the most important. No way, that's too simple. But think about it. If you want to be closer to God, it starts by loving him. Because our relationship with God is about loving him, connecting with him through that love. Our hearts, our souls, our minds, our strength. The important The most important thing that we can do when we want to connect with God is to love him. And that's because that we have to have a relationship with him. It's greater than any kind of rule. It's not just a checkbox to check off. It is a relationship. So the very first thing this week, it may sound too simple, it may sound too easy, but the truth is, if you want to get closer to God, if you want to connect with God, then spend time with him. Because spending time with God is a way to connect with God. You probably spent more time with your family than you usually do over winter break. That's required to have a relationship. Maybe you got to spend some time with some friends over break that you don't normally get to because of school and things that are going on. That's required to have that friendship. We got to spend time together. It's the same thing with God. Obviously, he's not sitting there next to you, but the more you spend time with him, the closer you're going to grow in your relationship with him. Your relationship only grows as you spend time. And so this week's challenge is, again, maybe too simple, but I would bet that it's something that might still be considered a challenge for everybody in here, and that's to find a way to spend time with God. Maybe for you, that means you pick up your Bible and you read it for 5 minutes this week. And some of you might be thinking, 5 minutes, that's easy. Did you read it for 5 minutes last week when you weren't at church? Like, just do a little bit more than what you did last week. Don't sit down and go, I'm going to read the whole Bible this week. Okay. If you read your Bible for 15 minutes a day, it takes you 365 days to read the whole Bible. So you're probably not going to do the whole Bible this week, right? People who set goals in January and fail usually set goals that are too big. They've never run before. They're going to run a marathon next month. It's probably not going to happen or go well, right? Now, you can train for it, prepare for it, but you got to take some steps, like a small race, a 5K, little things to build up to it. If you've never, ever done anything with pottery before, we can't just throw a lump of clay down at you and you make a beautiful vase your first try. You got to work at something, right? People that are great at basketball spend time working on basketball skills to get better. If you want to get to know God better, read your Bible more this week than you did last week. In your weekly, in the Bible app, we actually have a reading plan you can follow every day this week to help you get to know God better. Or maybe for you, it's taking time to pray. If you weren't here in service last weekend, if you go online, have your parents show you the video our high school pastor, Matt Pineda, preached last week on prayer. It's a really, really good teaching on how to get to know and have a relationship with God through prayer. Maybe for you, it's journaling. For me, I use a paper one because I get too distracted with things that are digital. I go places and get off what I was started with. So I sit down with a pen and paper and I write in my journal to think about and process what God's doing in my life. Maybe for you, it's putting in your headphones and listening to some worship music. So you celebrate God throughout your week with music. Maybe it's just taking some time to find a spot in your house where you can get away from everybody else and just be still and have a conversation with God. Whatever it is, spend time this week with God, because spending time with God is a way to connect with God. You're going to wrestle with this in your small group today, and you're going to answer this question, what's the one way I can spend time with God? And in fact, we're going to challenge you to come up with 3 different ways so you can try them this week and see what works best. The goal at the end of this 4-week series is not that you are a master at these methods. The goal is that you're closer to God and living more like Jesus. We're just trying to give you some tips and some tools to help you out. Also, on the info wall, when you leave today, we have these little booklets that say how to get to know and live like Jesus. It has recommended Bibles, it has reading plans, it has some links in here. If you want some more resources to help you, we're going to give you a ton of resources. It's up to you to decide this week, do I want to get to know God better? Do I want to connect with God? And will I spend the time it's important to make that difference?